Occasionally, without warning, a person may awaken to the realization that their current existence is completely foreign to them. Everything outside the house and in the reflection of the mirror is the same, but inside there is a void, not a broken, but a remote feeling, as if the spirit has hidden from the world and is waiting for peace to return. People often talk about it as an unidentified void or weird emptiness. As you pour yourself a cup of coffee in the morning, you gaze out the window at the ever-changing world around you and ask yourself when the actions lose their significance. You go through all the carefully selected grins, affirmations, and the desire to be noticed, and you can feel in your bones. Some part of you has ceased functioning. No, this is not an emergency. It is an encore. The old you, who was never one for crowd approval, is making a triumphant return. That which becomes silent when all others become noisy. The component that has perpetually been complete, despite your conditioning to question it. We live in a validation-obsessed society where everything, even suffering, needs a pretty presentation. Extreme when you opt not to provide an explanation for your content. Being able to sit quietly in meditation without drawing attention to oneself is a spiritual revolution. Obviously, nobody knows how to handle a person like her. Those who give up looking for them. The person who has given up on seeking love or success as indicators of their value in life. In a suspicious manner, it observes them. It describes them as weird, distant, and possibly conceited. The reality, though, is both more straightforward and mystifying than that. This individual has encountered oneself and managed to survive the experience. And when they're no longer subject to selection, they take on an otherworldly allure and become completely unbridled and liberated. However, external milestones do not record this voyage. It happens in a flash, and nobody will see it coming. Inconsolable sobs while you wash the dishes, relieved that an old emotion has finally emerged. Declining an invitation to a get-together out of respect for your own vitality rather than animosity. Feeling full while spending a Saturday night alone. These do not indicate seclusion. Such things happen while the body is trying to mend itself. They show that beneath the surface of your mundane life, something more profound is emerging. According to Carl Jung, the opportunity to discover one's authentic self is a once-in-a-lifetime privilege. However, you can't be yourself unless you let go of your conditioning. Shedding may be a terrible experience. Even though you're really just losing a part of yourself, it can feel like you're losing everything. Not a jaded cynic or icy loner, but a spirit at peace with itself emerges from the ashes of approval-seeking. A spirit that has discovered the sacredness within itself and so no longer needs attention. Maybe that's the most disturbing thing in the universe. Not your quietness per se, but the strength that emanates from it. Music. It may not be your fault if people feel awkward around you because you remain silent. Your silence may be the key that unlocks a secret they've fought their whole lives to keep hidden. In a culture where passing judgment is the unseen measure of value and where being on the go is taken for meaning, the machine will begin to panic the second you cease reaching. We've grown so accustomed to the buildings around us that we no longer recognize them. Everything from the displays we use to read to the metrics we use to evaluate our performance has it embedded in it. The message is the same in every ad and understated message. Just being you is insufficient. You can't experience love, authenticity, or desire until you're cherished, appreciated, and desired. And what's the point of being here if nobody's looking? But suppose that was always untrue. In what scenario? Was this unseen pressure the one that demands you be noticed, selected, and loved all the time, an external strategy rather than an inherent reality? Something made to keep you searching rather than empower you. Because they no longer need or chase, people who have achieved inner wholeness are able to become silent, not passive, but forceful, and a threat to everything that thrives on insecurity. Furthermore, that power is immutable and unchangeable. It is what it is. In a world where such an aura is prevalent, it can be quite unnerving, consumed with the need to perform. Wanting to be loved, is a fundamentally human desire. Having it no longer be a determinant of your worth, though, is incredibly freeing. Imagine a woman in her 50s who, after decades of sacrificing who she is for the sake of others, her work, her social life, and her family, starts to wonder what she wants out of life. She no longer feels the need to justify her absence from the reunion, from responding to every message, and from posting for months on end. Her heart is full, devoid of sound. Even though she can breathe normally again, everyone around her is confused about how to deal with her newfound consciousness. Her acquaintances describe her as emotionally disconnected. Her loved ones claim she's transformed. She's ceased performing according to their interpretation. This change brings sadness. Sadness at having wasted our lives attempting to impress a world that didn't care about us. Still, there is a return, a reclaiming, a calm delight within that pain. That is when the spirit reconnects with itself amid the stillness. The dormant portion of your being. Soft defiance starts to sprout under duties and titles. Eventually, you will cease seeking approval to do things like relax, feel, and imagine your own future. To others, you may seem weird, but to you, you are precious. But what if someone decides to defy a system that feeds off of people's insecurity? Their volume remains constant. They start to stand out. Their affirmation is significant. No one's opinion matters. Instead of seeking acceptance, they start to mold their lives according to what feels right. Moreover, even though everyone does not rejoice at this type of waking, rather, it quivers subtly when faced with it. The machinery of validation is most unsettled by a soul that no longer needs it. Listen closely. Music, when you know you're whole on your own, there's a subtle change in your spirit. It comes without a proclamation or pyrotechnics. It approaches gradually, like a tide receding from the coast. Standing alone, you experience clarity rather than despair. The world frequently misunderstands this time. Claiming that you're withdrawing from society is one possibility, exhibiting symptoms of withdrawal and coldness, but in reality, they're seeing the breakdown of dependency. You have stopped looking for your reflection in the mirror. To experience reality, you are no longer reliant on reflections. That in a society that is dependent on reassuring one another undermines our social conditioning. Everyone learns at a young age that completing a task requires a link. Feel they are lacking something fundamental if they are not chosen, noticed, or validated. As soon as you start to undo that, when one believes and understands that being entire, rather than needed, brings true peace, a profound change takes place on the inside. When people demand self-betrayal from you, you stop striving to fit in. You quit changing the brightness of your lights so other people can relax. Rather, you keep burning slowly, softly enough to warm your own universe. The iciness of estrangement is not here. Sovereignty radiates warmth. Imagine the lonesome man in his early 60s who makes his morning stroll in the park. His lack of oversight. The phone that he was using. You won't see him sporting earbuds. He doesn't look to see if anyone is observing. He moves at a leisurely pace, as if his footfalls were the only thing moving him. It's a sacred union. Perhaps he was rushing to meetings long ago, striving to meet everyone's expectations while ignoring his own needs. On the other hand, he now seems different. He has moved on from seeking approbation. He is now comfortable in his own presence. Every person who ever told him he was inadequate is now silent because he understands himself. People notice, of course. A number of murmur he's weird. His isolation is misunderstood, and others feel sorry for him. The silent power that comes from not having to explain yourself is something people fail to notice. What a liberated man becomes when he stops worrying about how he looks. He has given up on attempting to win them over. He is striving for authenticity. That is why he is so elusive and difficult to influence. Not because he is unyielding, but because he has staked his identity on something more fundamental than the acceptance of his peers. His inflexibility is due to his. Simply put, he has rediscovered his true identity, separate from the one the world imposed on him. Being completely self-possessed is unusual. You can't buy it with affirmations or learn it from books. You have to be able to sit through the stillness, the pain, and the lonely nights when no one else will celebrate your success except you. And at the end of the journey, individuals who follow that road find something subtly magnificent. The more complete you grow, the more the universe struggles to adapt to your new way of playing the game. You're not idling around to choose. You don't have to sacrifice your soul for love. You have transformed into the sanctuary you sought in other people. And when a person realizes they don't require affirmation, attention, or noise to be alive, what goes on inside of them? In the stillness they've opted for, what moves? Though subtle, the response packs a punch. They start to sense the resurgence of their own reality. Their indestructibility stems from the fact that their truth remains unaltered by external influences and needs. By constructing inner ground rather than walls, their burden can be carried by someone. Anyone courageous enough to stop fleeing will eventually face a terrifying moment in their lives, as played by music. Their own selves, not the outside world. It usually starts in peaceful settings, during the unstructured hours of a weekend, or in a room when the clock is ticking, but all other distractions fade away. It starts off as a kind of isolation, the kind that, when it echoes, makes your breath seem shallow and your chest feel empty. However, if you remain there for an extended period of time and refrain from reaching for, new sounds start to emerge, whether you're on your phone or returning to background noise. A voice, your own, that you haven't heard in years, not dread or nothingness. Being alone does not terrify the majority of individuals. What they will discover in that solitude is something they dread. The raw material of history. There's an unsaid yearning. Those recollections that, when left unattended, softly tap on the mental doorways. Silence is viewed as a threat in a society that celebrates diversion. On the other hand, the spirit is not present for amusement. This is where it needs to be. When you finally stop avoiding looking at yourself in the mirror, it will be waiting for you beneath all the layers of distraction and busyness. A lady I knew in my younger years had lived much of her life socializing. Constantly in the vicinity, constantly required. She had her evenings scheduled, her calendar full, and she had practiced her smile. However, she sensed emptiness beneath the din life jolted her out of her groove one season. Changing jobs, drifting apart from friends, and landing in a place she hadn't wanted but had no choice but to accept. At first, she struggled with it, assuming silence as a form of discipline. However, in the end, she gave in. She sat down with it instead of filling it, walking silently, eating in silence, and letting her nights unfold as they pleased were all things she began to do. Also, in that area, an unforeseen development started to take shape. Unable to put her finger on it, she broke down in tears. She began writing again, this time for herself rather than an audience, and chuckled at long-forgotten recollections. The world saw her as lonely, but she was actually rediscovering herself. Voice. This is the most paradoxical thing. Noise drowns out the soul's voice. And a low voice is speaking. You have to get so silent that you can't pretend any longer if you want to hear it. That you must stop putting on a mask that gets you accepted but steals your inner calm. When people quit trying to fit in with others, they often find themselves confronted with a terror and beauty that no throng can match. A self-meeting occurs. The one who hurts, dreams, and remembers, not the one who has been shaped by other people or by external curations. The individual who, with a faith that goes beyond just survival. Silence is not empty, as many who venture down this road quickly discover. Everything you buried is there. Additionally, those hidden elements start to surface after a courageous period of sitting, not to damage you, but to return you to wholeness. An old hurt shows up not to destroy you, but to demand reparation. Rekindling a long-lost delight, it brings back memories of a time when you were fully alive in ways that others couldn't have imagined. The hallowed room where rebirth begins is actually what the world labels loneliness. Moreover, it was nowhere to feel sad, a location of coming back. A person is not isolating themselves when they opt for a peaceful evening instead of going out with friends, or when they make their way home alone without seeking validation from others. Together, they are merging. They are merging into one. The most fearless movement is taking place on the inside, even while on the outside, everything appears to be stationary. The return of the spirit to the physical form. Putting on an act no longer shattered the identity. For that reason, we go on to the following stage. With quiet determination rather than clamor. An ongoing tradition. It gently retrains the brain, heals the injuries, and reacquaints the heart with the skill of fearless breathing. Sound, for many, a moment of quiet comes as a surprise, a break, a disruption. It becomes holy, though, for the awakened. This is not a vacation. Rather, it is a way of life, an intentional practice of peaceful ritual. When the sun goes down and everyone starts to relax, that's when the real job starts. This isn't just a fad or a tradition, taken from sources other than my own. The gentle light of honesty leads you back to the inner altar where you meet yourself. The inquiries aren't overbearing, yet they remain. How did today's pursuits leave me feeling depleted? What false smile was that on my face? To fit in, where did I give up on who I really am? On the surface, this appears to be nothing more than the gradual, everyday awakening. There will be no praise or admiration, only the honest image of one's self-reflection and the strength to face it head-on. Across preoccupied with being seen, silence becomes revolutionary, just because it brings out your authenticity rather than amplifying your voice. Also, being honest scares the people who benefit from your insecurity. That's why this journey, while incredibly rewarding, is also incredibly challenging. You can now calm your nerves with music or distract yourself from pain by staying occupied. It is your choice to feel. Something unbreakable starts to take root in that emotion. A man I knew in his early 50s had formerly relied on momentum to build his life. He was trailed like a shadow by success. However, the nighttime stillness was intolerable. He had a jam-packed schedule. Even to himself, he remained a mystery when it came to his own feelings. Then a change came about, his demeanor softening. He began to forego attending social events and instead spend his nights seated by the window, pen poised over his notebook. Initially, it felt uncomfortable. His ideas were all over the place. Nonetheless, the ritual eventually became sacred. He started keeping a journal in which he detailed his hopes, dreams, and regrets. Sitting there, he felt the wrath that had. Words failed to express the unnamed sorrow. A homecoming emerged from what started as contemplation. Even after a few months of withdrawal, he remained silent. Since he no longer had anything to prove, he grew quieter. Thus, the dilemma arises. The more time you dedicate to cultivating this inner calm, the less you will desire external stimulation. Reason being, you've started to believe in yourself more, not because you've given up on it. The distinction between an impulse and an intuition, a reaction and a response, becomes clear. Things start to stand out when you seem to be operating more from habit than insight. Plus, these insights alter not only your nights, but also your days. You slow down, but your steps are filled with greater meaning when you quit trying to please everyone at once. However, there are many who oppose this commitment. Some nights, you'll just want to get away from it all. You may feel tempted to scroll, make a phone call, or engage in any activity that doesn't require you to delve deeper when the burden of contemplation becomes too great. But if you remain, if you persist and choose tranquility, intense stimulus generates personal transformation. Not in a big sense, but in the little things that add up to make a difference in the grand scheme of things. Your sleeping habits are unique. You sound more deliberate. Instead of walls, you hold your limits like holy gates. Plus, you've moved on from the things that used to drain you. Because of this, the practice can be considered spiritual. Its value lies not in its flawlessness or polish, but in the fact that it helps you rediscover who you really are. My identity apart from my performances. The one who is unconcerned with others' opinions, categorizations, or to make oneself feel important. This is the part of oneself that loves profoundly listens intently, and whispers to others. And the more you go back to that place, the more you'll start to wonder something that would make everything clear. Exactly whose life am I living here? To whose aspirations am I thwarting this pursuit? I don't know what truth would be left if I let go of all that. Being still does not mean you are escaping life. Wherever you are, that is where life meets you. And when you commit to it, not just for a while, but for the rest of your life, you start to move through the world in a different way. I don't. More pronounced, but unmoved. Completer, not more beloved. Music, a query whispered in the dark, begins a silent uprising that doesn't begin with shouted voices or spectacular exits. Is this even real? Although seemingly insignificant at first glance, this one event threatens to upend a life built on unfounded assumptions. Our environment shapes who we are for a long time, maybe even decades. Names, principles, regulations, and responsibilities are bestowed upon us, and we embrace them without question. They convey. We should follow their lead on worship, dread, and the characteristics of a decent life. But when we start to doubt that unseen script, an ancestor within us awakens. Thoughts push back, feelings waver, but knowledge resides in the soul. At this point, true enlightenment sets in. The gradual eroding of certainty is more common than a sudden occurrence. Imagine attending a family reunion and again and over again hearing the same old banter, as if it were reminiscences of a bygone era. Though you nod and grin, there's still something. To you, it appears to be in a completely different room, right now, but we're not on the same page. There at that crack, light starts to seep in. There is no betrayal in the uneasiness. Truth is struggling to find its breath. This falling apart feels like being left high and dry at first. It seems like you're drifting apart from your roots, but you're actually just getting back to the essence of who you are. I know a lady in her 40s who had always done what her parents had asked of her. She established the life that her family had always dreamed of for her, a prestigious profession. Work, a conventional marriage, and regular, predictable schedules. But with each passing year, she felt detached from her own mirror, as if it were becoming increasingly mute. Rather than a major catastrophe, a casual stroll into a bookshop marked the turning point. Contrary to her upbringing's strict moral code, she decided to read a book that had been forbidden to her. She broke down in tears as she read, since the book confirmed her worst fears rather than providing answers. In that instant, she wound her way inward, unraveling the concepts she had ingested fully. Neither bitterness nor rebellion set in with her. She emerged. In that moment of clarity, she made the decision to step away from the family company, seek out new meaning, and create a life that was not inherited but chosen. The family was unharmed by her bravery. It exposed her genuine character. This is the unspoken price of waking up. People who have influenced you in the past will no longer recognize you as you grow more genuine. They could dismiss it as a phase or even accuse you of abandoning your heritage or asserting that you've turned selfish. Actually, what they're grieving is the version of you that they believed in and found solace in. Furthermore, when you delve further, you come to see that a sense of belonging contingent upon compliance is inherently unauthentic. In the midst of love, there is submission. You transform into an unboxable, marketable, and predictable presence in the world when you let go of the need to be understood so that you can be yourself. That is why those who challenge long-held ideas frequently embark on solitary journeys, not due to practicality rather than hubris. The previous terminology is inappropriate. The traditional rites no longer hold any significance. Things that used to feel familiar now reverberate with discord. Even though it hurts, being alone is not the same as being exiled. The zone between your past self and your future self is a barren wasteland. A peculiar dilemma emerges in that area. Somehow, you found your way here, because you are now experiencing your own truth and not a lie told to you. A new identity is emerging within you. The conformity-loving society also fails to gladly accept this. Establishing a level of predictability is crucial for the success of many systems, cultures, and emotional bonds. However, the best kind of ungovernability occurs when a person builds their own code. They will not be silenced or repressed into conformity. They prioritize alignment over expectation when making decisions. Not their rebelliousness, but their freedom is what gives them strength. However, there is a cost to this liberty. It challenges you to venture into uncharted territory armed with nothing but guiding light within. It begs you to stop worrying about whether other people like you, appreciate you, or even understand you. It begs you to let go of the mask you formerly wore in order to rise in the truth that lurked beneath. You find something unique in that ascent. Some people won't be able to accompany you, but the secret portions of yourself will be revealed. Remember that others aren't reacting to your wrongness when they start to distance themselves from you, accusing you of being selfish or rebellious because you prefer to be alone. They are responding to what you. Freedom. The world will consistently ask you to turn down your light as long as you keep shining brightly. However, being chosen is no longer a condition in which you exist. Stay genuine to yourself. Music. As you slowly let go of your old self, you may feel the pain of isolation envelop you like a heavy fog. There seems to be no end in sight, as if you were at the shore of a lake that reflected no one. Outsiders may refer to it as being alone. Could subtly suggest that you've turned inward too much or that something is lacking. However, by paying close attention, you can tune out the outside noise and, however, your subcutaneous pulse will reveal a different story. Not a lack, but an invitation, a homecoming rather than an absence. This isn't a hole that needs filling. It's a quiet place that deserves respect. You're not going anywhere in that stillness. A new chapter has begun for you. What people perceive as solitude is frequently the hallowed ground of re-entering one's own being. Your quiet is hiding a wealth of joy that the world, programmed to associate quiet with melancholy, is blind to. It is unable to understand how abandoning the shouting is an act of dedication rather than hopelessness, because genuine isolation is the soul's way of grieving over superficial relationships. When you stop nourishing distractions and start wanting truth, you will experience grief. To contrast, being alone does not mean there are no other people around. You are there in a meaningful way, the one you neglected because you were preoccupied with being admired, needed, and followed. In this moment of stillness, you reestablish your ability to hear, not with your physical ears, but with your very being. There was this guy I met in his 50s who had been a performer for the majority of his life. Every time we got together, he was the life of the party, the one who cracked the jokes, spilled the beans, and plotted our next move. But he had never been alone before, what with his subtle breakup and the gradual disintegration of friendships that had seemed everlasting. The initial hush was nearly painful. Uncertain of how to make advantage of the quiet, he aimlessly explored his home. Constantly browsing, sharing, reacting, and feeling desperate, he instinctively grabbed for his phone. A sense of belonging. Something changed, though, while he sat in his kitchen one night, listening to nothing except the hum of the fridge. He sat quietly, closed his eyes, and set the phone aside. Distractions removed. Music, podcasts, and all. Simply be present, breathe. Then the tears started to flow, originating not in agony, but in acknowledgement. This was his first performance without an audience. He only existed. Plus, being in that genuine company was like coming home. When you're alone, you can see what the noise masks. Masks tumble to the ground in quiet. You become aware of the chats that sapped your energy. Those partnerships that made it this far were the ones where you gave more than you received. The frequency with which you occupied your time in order to evade the pain of your own voice starts to sink in. This time, though it's a more assertive, honest voice and it's getting louder, its queries are really basic. What is it that you truly desire? When no one is looking, who do you become? When was the last time you gave a breath to a part of yourself? These inquiries are also not kind. Their flesh is charred. Their brilliance illuminates. Their guidance is invaluable. As you bask in their light, you can almost make out the shapes of unmasking your authentic self, not molded according to anticipation, but shaped by actual presence. If you choose to spend time alone, people around you can see it as a phase, a retreat, or a breakdown. But what they're seeing is the beginning of a new life. You're holding together quite well. Hurting is happening, releasing the demands of explanation, entertainment, and selection. You have finally overcome your need for superficial approval. You long for harmony, authenticity, and completeness. And that need for food is holy. It takes you inward rather than outside, to a spot where there's no need for praise now that you've regained the ability to detect your own heartbeat. Oh, and there are moments when you feel really alone on your journey, but not in the conventional sense. Being unloved isn't the only lonely thing. Being unrecognizable to people who knew you only through your mask is far more lonely. You might find solace in solitude when you abandon the stage persona and enter the realm of subtle authenticity. Attaining clarity's friendship, awareness's intimacy, and beingness strength is the first step. Securely planted in the here and now. Being sufficiently still, not racing, not reacting, may allow you to perceive something miraculous. The silence you dreaded speaking to you, not through words but through knowledge. You may begin to sense a change, subtle but strong, like roots spreading farther into the earth. It hits you. You can't afford to be found by other people anymore. The pieces of yourself that were never truly lost, merely buried, are beginning to resurface. As a result of reflecting on the past, the isolation fades. Beyond any superficial bond, what remains is something more subtle, profound, and inner-directed. Feeling at home. An emptiness that is no longer hungry for more. Your journey does not end here. Becoming someone whose silence is more powerful than any outcry is a first step in that direction. After being alone for a while, you gain a calm power according to the music. Something within you starts to wake up after all those late nights of reckoning and long silences that stripped away performance and pretense. Rest. Not in a state of resignation, but in a state of rootedness. Nothing more has to be proven. You have stopped using affirmation as a crutch. A sense of calmness settles over you, acting more like a border than a wall. And within lies the certainty of your truth. This does not exude an air of self-assurance. This is the clarity that comes from having seen through the facade and into one's true nature. Some things are permanent once you've crossed the desert of detachment and opted to speak your truth rather than the herd's. Going back isn't about, as opposed to the person you've always been, but is told to be. As you cut back on your speech, the impact of your words becomes more noticeable. Although you are more attentive now, you are less receptive to persuasion. Even when the tides of fashion turn, you have a steadfast compass within. There's been no uprising. Mature people exhibit this quality. Radical self-honesty is the source of this profound knowing. It is the kind that destroys all false beliefs and leaves behind only the truth. Your boundaries are no longer being rationalized. Quit saying you're sorry for being quiet. You come to a conclusion, elucidating your tranquility, as your own being has transformed into the explanation. Just being here speaks more than words ever could. A woman in her 40s with whom I had a conversation had spent her entire life attempting to meet the needs of other people. An unflinching supporter, a trustworthy collaborator, and an all-day warrior. Even when her spirits dipped, her smile remained unwavering. They relied on her, adored her, and complimented her. However, a weighty sense of silent tiredness was concealed beneath the flattery. Messages that were draining her energy were eventually ignored. On her way, leaving behind a group of people who praised her efforts, but never inquired as to her heart's desires. Not seeking enlightenment, but seeking oneness with her spirit, she began to journal every morning. She felt betrayed at first because she felt guilty about choosing herself. Until something caught her eye, though, anxieties reduced. Her once timid voice now exuded a solid assurance. Others thought she was cold and unapproachable. They claimed she had transformed. It was hers. Her reactions were no longer driven by terror. Truthfully, she was acting. Once the need to be loved is no longer there, You transform into an indescribable entity, worthy of societal admiration. You mature into an independent thinker who doesn't need anyone else's approval to act. Someone who experiences strong emotions without letting them overwhelm them. A person who views isolation as a means of connection rather than a means of escape. You have given up trying to fit into systems that didn't make you entire in the first place. Participating in the performance of perfection is no longer something you do. Your demeanor instead exudes a subtle rebellion that is driven by a desire for sovereignty rather than resistance. At some point, you quit worrying about whether other people will. Grasp the concept, as serenity is no longer exchanged for comprehension. Still, it's not free. You separate yourself from your former self and the world as you draw nearer to this inner freedom. The rate of invitations decreases. The frequency of the discussions decreases. Even the known becomes strange. I don't mean that you've turned a blind eye. I mean that you've just surpassed the frequency of your need to join. Your integrity, dignity, and self-confidence are the very qualities that make you unbreakable. Intelligence are the same qualities that annoy other people. The ability to project onto you has been removed. No longer can they take advantage of your lack of speech or energy. And that is disturbing for individuals who are still caught up in the show. However, a different form of intimacy emerges even at a distance. A harmonious union with your principles, your gut, and a reality that reflects your essence rather than twisting it. You start to understand that living with a single decision is more liberating than having an infinite number of alternatives. In full detail, doing what's right by yourself, even if it means giving up the idealized version of life you were brought up to pursue. This is not a state of profound isolation. It is the freedom that comes from being alone. Here, you're no longer performing. Thus, there's no need to applaud. Nobody warns you that this change won't make things simpler. It adds realism. When you stop bending over backwards, when you stop explaining things, and when you stop shrinking, people start to notice who remains and who values you. And lastly, maybe the most profound insight of all, that you feel comfortable venturing out on your own, for the simple reason that you have come to understand that living in accordance with your truth is like taking a baby step toward freedom and away from captivity. Soundtrack. Coming back to oneself isn't easy, and no one can tell you that. Light and freedom are the words they use to describe awakening, but they hardly ever mention shedding. When you start down a new road, the reverberations that follow are seldom pleasant. Not booming, but being more forthright. It is in the most subtle form of exile, nonetheless, that many find their awakening. Such where people are still around you, but they aren't perceived the way you used to. Things get cold and distant in relationships that were once warm and fuzzy. The meaning of words that used to define you begins to fade. No, you're not damaged. You're just not cutting it anymore. Thus, what is lost at this point is not a loss at all. This is an illuminating. What you believed was holding you together was actually only a front. Your self-perception was always a mirror of the world's expectations for you. Even in this kind of insight, there's loss. It is not that you're solitary, but rather that you have come a long way and cannot turn back now. The truth has opened within of you, and it cannot be unlearned. Even in the people you love, you can't remove the masks. Something more profound is emerging from that silence, though, if you pay close attention, you can hear your own presence in it. When the early wind brushes against your skin, it becomes instantly familiar with the person you touch. The process of breathing back into your body is not the same as staying alive. However, as a member, being misunderstood carries a sacred weight when it signifies that you are no longer concealing yourself. You start to carry yourself with a more subdued bravery. Authenticity, rather than seeking explanation, is what this type of thing is all about. Perhaps the most profound reality is that you were never rightfully the owner of what you relinquished. The ovation, the anticipation, the aspirations that were loaned out. In your story, they were never more than guests. But home is where your spirit, your voice, and your tranquility are. Allow the misconceptions to arise. Allow the languishing quiet. Allow the road to be bumpy. You are no longer lost, even when the world cannot perceive you properly. At long last, you're transformed. Furthermore, above the bustle and the demands, the life that was destined for you is patiently anticipating your arrival. Post a remark if you felt moved to share your thoughts or feelings, since even a single phrase may have reflected your own inner experience. Has the presence of that one person ever made you feel at home? On the other hand, have you? Are you still on the holy road leading back to who you are? Even if it's unfinished, your narrative has the potential to be someone else's guiding light, the sign they were seeking but didn't realize they had. Also, if you or someone you care about is secretly fighting the false beliefs that love is always painful, that giving up control is necessary for true connection, or that they don't deserve forgiveness and reconciliation, give them a copy of this video. In order to remind those who need it, I need your assistance. Shrinkage is not a requirement of genuine love. Genuine bonding doesn't necessitate death on the cross. Plus, the bond we have with our own self-knowledge is the most important one we'll ever have. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell before you leave. In this realm, we go into the depths of things, discovering the subconscious, the intricate web of the mind, and the ways in which each interaction mirrors our own growth. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, themes, or wounds you would like us to address in upcoming videos. In this room, life is in your honor. We value and much appreciate your opinion. Your presence here, in this film, and in the sacred task of remembering your true self is greatly appreciated. Keep this in mind at all times. Your spirit will know, not with terror, but with calm, when the one is right there. However, until then, make the relationship you establish within yourself your most intimate. Yes, that is the groundwork. Home is where it's at. All things true originate from that state of completeness. Looking forward to seeing you on that way.